Well, meanwhile, Economist Azar Jammine says Transnet Group CEO Portia Derby had no choice but to resign as criticism against state-owned enterprise intensifies following its failure to perform. For analysis on this, let's bring in Mr. Azar Jammine, Chief Economist at Econometrix. Azar, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what do you make of this resignation? You say it was bound to happen?
I think it was bound to happen because the perceptions in the public arena were that the decline of Transnet has taken place under the oversight of Portia Derby as a CEO. The fact is that a lot of the damage was inflicted long before she became CEO. In fact, the very fact that she became CEO is a function of attempts at trying to address the state capture that was crippling the SOE prior to her coming on as CEO. But people look at the results and see that since 2019, there has been a progressive decline in the volume of rail transported to and from the country's ports, with significant damage to the country's exports, amounting to, over a period of time, more than 100 billion rands worth of lost export revenue. And I think what has really tilted the stakes against her most recently is that the implications of this have been that coal mines and some other mineral mines have been losing out quite badly in terms of their ability to export. And this is now putting the jobs of thousands of workers in the relevant mining industries at jeopardy. And I suppose the CEO is now the person to take the fall. A lot of business as well as trade unions have been calling for her to step down, basically on the basis of this deterioration in the performance of the utility. We also heard last week the Transnet results, which recorded a 5.7 billion rand loss. And she is the one who is carrying the blame for all this. There have also been accusations that she instituted a lot of changes in management when she came into her position, offering attractive voluntary retrenchment packages to many of the existing management team and replacing them with persons who are said to be relatively inexperienced and probably not don't have the relevant expertise to ensure the ongoing successful operation of a massive organization like Transnet.
But what's quite interesting, of course, is the massive spikes that you're seeing in revenue at Transnet, right? Quite concerning. You mentioned the 5.7 billion rand loss in the financial year that ended in March. I think about how in the financial year prior to that, they recorded a 5 billion rand profit. So what are we seeing here? I mean, are we essentially seeing a leadership crisis, and how do we address that? I mean, you're seeing it with Eskom and other SOEs, that certainly there's an instability at leadership and it trickles down and comes to the balance sheet. So how do we deal with that crisis?
Well, the fundamental, many people will differ on their opinions as to how to deal with the crisis. But one group, including the person that you interviewed prior to myself, basically believe that a lot of the problem lies in the fact that the government has not been wanting to embrace the private sector in finding solutions to these problems and has been stuck in a mindset of control by the ruling party of whoever is appointed to various top positions within the utility. And we all know that this problem of cadre deployment has permeated the quality and expertise and competence of many areas of public discourse, including the municipalities, especially them, but also the SOEs. And, it's no coincidence that Eskom has found itself in difficulty in a situation where there has been a leadership crisis, and we still do not have a permanent CEO in that organization 8 months after the departure of the previous CEO. This is a kind of problem that is likely to continue being encountered so long as the SOEs are managed or controlled by the ruling party, first and foremost, who in a manner that does not allow a free rein to boards to select the appropriate candidates to head up these organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because, in that point, of course, you raise the ruling party, and one could easily think that we're politicizing something that is quite logistical. And here's the issue, though, and I want to talk about and go into it a little bit further, because I want to talk about the importance of Transnet for our economy. Really, that's where I want to get to, right? The logistical relevance of Transnet when we talk about it possibly being the arteries of our very economy. I mean, if we get this wrong, what are we facing as our economic future?
Well, we're already facing it. We've already seen a sharp deterioration in our ability to basically trade goods and services, our ability to export, with the result that the current account deficit is worse than it might otherwise have been. That has also contributed towards perceptions amongst investors of a decline in South Africa's economic performance over the longer term, and has contributed towards a sharp deterioration in the exchange rate, which in turn has had inflationary implications and resulted in interest rates being a lot higher than they need otherwise have been, to the detriment of consumers who are bearing the brunt of higher costs needlessly, and who are having to bear the cost of high interest rates as well. So everyone is suffering as a consequence of this. Transnet is second only to Eskom in terms of its importance as a single entity to the economy, and many would argue that that is why we need to try and diversify the nature of the operation into different shareholders and allow private interests to come into being, so that we are not hostage to the collapse of a single big entities that we are currently seeing.
Yeah, Dr. Jammine, when we see the resignation of a CEO of a large SOE, I think one of the first questions become, who will find this post attractive to then want to take it over? And maybe what we should ask is, what are the characteristics of the person that then takes over that post?
Well, this is a dilemma that we have faced also with Eskom and a number of other SOEs. They are poisoned chalices in many respects. In fact, I would say that Portia Derby herself would argue that she inherited a poisoned chalice when she took over the organization in the first instance. And at the end of the day, it casts aspersions on whether or not the government is able to continue running state-owned enterprises off its own bat, rather than actually opening up the sphere of running important service delivery sources through absorbing the population at large and the private sector into trying to do so more effectively. You're quite right. I don't know who would want to take up such a position other than someone who is prepared to, from a purely patriotic point of view, to try and carry the can, to try and rescue the country and its economy. But we have seen in the past that some of the individuals who have tried to do this have then been vilified when they have run up against opposition constraints and been seen to be the problem rather than the attempted solution to the problem.
I think just one last thought, and I want to throw this at you because it's very difficult to have this conversation without really thinking about what public perceptions are about the recommendations for us to add private sector then into state-owned entities like Transnet, right? Because once you start saying, well, for us to get better operations of a SOE like Transnet, people already use the word privatization, and it's not a very popular word in South Africa. That's the reality, right? So what do we do about that conversation?
Well, that goes to the very heart of our economic malaise. There seems to be indecision as to whether or not the solutions to our economic problems are to attract more private sector involvement or to get the state to take even a bigger commanding role in managing the economy, notwithstanding the fact that the evidence of recent years has shown that it is incapable of doing so. But unfortunately, the majority or a large proportion of the population has been fed the idea that everything needs to be operated by the state, and that anything to do with the private sector is exploitative and bad. And until such time as we rid ourselves of those ideological divides, I think that we are facing huge economic headwinds in this country.
Yeah, Dr. Jammine, let's leave it there. We really do appreciate your time and thank you so much for speaking to us. Dr. Azar Jammine is, of course, Chief Economist at Econometrix, speaking to us there about his thoughts on the resignation of Transnet Group CEO Portia Derby.